Hello guys, today I'll be explaining what's inside a computer, two computers this time, and also correcting what I said wrong in the last What's Explaining a Computer video, because I said a few things wrong, including saying the RAM, which is what I have here, is a SSD, but it's not. SSD is storage. Anyway, well, I'll get to that later. So first we'll be looking at these computers, just kind of overall what you can see, and then I'll get into the more in-depth stuff. So first, the most noticeable thing is probably the fact that you can see this GPU here, and there's nothing here. So in the last what I was explaining what's inside a computer video, I tried finding a GPU, but there wasn't actually a GPU. The thing that was there was an audio card. So yeah, there's no GPU, which was this computer. I took out the audio card, but it was right here. But that's not a GPU. GPU, graphics processing unit. This is what a GPU looks like, So this is also what a GPU looks like. The audio card is probably like as thin as this motherboard here, and doesn't have a giant heatsink on it because it doesn't need cooling as much. Basically what the GPU does is it's the thing that actually gives the signal to your monitor, and it gets the signal from the motherboard and CPU, and that's pretty much it. It does have VRAM, which can store like 3D type stuff like images or like codes that it might need to use in like a minute or two or later or something. So then it'll store them in the VRAM. Different GPUs have different types of VRAM. There's GDDR1 all the way to, could be 7 or 8 by now, maybe even 9. Which is different from motherboard RAM. That's called DDR, double data rate, and that only goes 1 to 5. We will be covering those in a sec. Well, 1 to 4 at least. I don't have DDR5 because it's way too expensive, as some of you might know. Anyway, I'll get to that in a second. So we covered the GPU. It gets signals from the CPU and motherboard to display to the monitor. Next, the CPU, computer processing unit. There's a few different types of CPUs. Obviously, there's AMD and Intel. So say for Intel, they kind of like to use, these are both Intel CPUs. This is like a Celeron. This is a Intel i5. This is a 6400. This one I don't know. It says like where is it? D340. Someone let me know what that is in the comments. It's too old. This thing, okay. One thing, this is a newer computer, so it might be a little closer to the standard normal computers, modern ones. This thing is from the Stone Age, but still works. So yeah, so Intel likes to say this is an Intel processor right here. They like to have the pins on the motherboard, and it's just kind of flat on the CPU here. The newer AMD ones are like that too, but the older Intel and older AMD usually have the pins on the CPU, so it's actually the opposite. So the pins would be on this, and there would just be a bunch of holes in the motherboard socket for the CPU. That's what this one is. This has the pins on the CPU, and that controls all the data going through. So it'll come from the hard drive, and then go to CPU, and then basically the GPU into your monitor. But there's a RAM. So onto the RAM, that's random access memory. So say when the CPU is computing stuff, it might need to give stuff to the RAM to hold for a minute. It's random access data, so it'll give it randomly, and then I'll take it back, and then give it nothing, and like it's all over the place, random, because it's random access memory. And there's different types of that. So there's, as I said, there's DDR1 to 5. DDR5 is very fast. It's the fastest generation at this time. And I got some DDR1 all the way to 4. So let's say with DDR1, this stick is actually from this computer. And the older the RAM stick is, usually the less RAM it is. But sometimes there is, say, like you'll have 32 gigabyte kit of DDR4 and 16 of DDR5. Kind of fluctuates like that. But say DDR1, like it'd be probably rare to see 1 or 2 gigabytes of a stick kit for DDR1. Anyway, this is a DDR1. Take a look here. And another thing, the newer they get, the cleaner they kind of look. So, say this is DDR1, then moving on to DDR2. You can see, get my light not to shine in the way, PC2, so DDR2. Now, this is 1 gigabyte stick. And, well, you can see it's already clear. There's no modules on this side, and the smaller modules on this side. But this runs probably faster than DDR1. Obviously, what is a generation newer? So we can see here, it's DDR2 on to DDR3. And all of these things have laptop versions. This is what this is. So this would be a DDR3. This is an 8 gigabyte stick. And usually the higher the memory in the stick, the more modules sometimes, because they need more stuff to hold the memory that it can give out. That's DDR3. Is DDR3 laptop memory. So you can see it's more compact because it has to go in a smaller space. Okay, DDR4. Like this is DDR4. And this is a heatsink, so say when RAM, as it runs faster and has more memory, the chips get hotter, so it needs to draw some heat away. And this is what this does. Obviously there is DDR4 without a heatsink, so this is one without. And you can see it looks way cleaner. There's only 4 actual modules on the RAM. Yep, better at organizing, I guess. In DDR5, here's a picture of DDR5. Okay, and then, okay, so we covered RAM. Now we're gonna go on the power supply unit. So basically the power supply unit gives signals, or not signals, power to all your parts. So the motherboard, the CPU, if we actually take a look here, there's CPU power, so this is power directly to the CPU, and then it has power to the motherboard, direct power to the GPU, and this is a PCIe for the GPU, and those run by PCIes. And then also power for the storages, which I'll get into that in a second. So obviously there's different, how much wattage, the power supplies go by wattage. So this is like a 1000 watt power supply, so it gives lots of power. And if it doesn't actually give all 1000 watts at a time. It only gives what the motherboard wants or requires. And yeah, usually the older the parts, the less power, especially because the older GPUs didn't, like, some of them didn't even have these extra power pins. It was just motherboard powered. So yeah, and then on to the storage. So this is what I got wrong in the last video. I called RAM SSD, which is solid state drive. And yes, they kind of work off the same principle of nothing moving and all being electronically kind of stored. The RAM, I just dropped my RAM. The RAM is only random active memory usage, or short-term memory, when the storage is long-term memory. So even when you turn the computer off, it'll still hold the data, when the RAM will wipe when you turn off the computer. So basically there's technically three types of storage. There's HDD, hard disk drive, there's SSD, solid state drive, and then there's kind of two types of SSDs. There's SATA, and then there's NVMe. So basically NVMe, which I don't have an NVMe, but I have a slot. This is what you can put an NVMe in. It's like a little stick. I'll put a picture of it. And that would go here. So it's going directly into the motherboard, no wires. you can see the pins here going directly into the motherboard. With SATA, if we take a look at this, if we go in here, you can see this cable, that's a SATA. So I'll go from whatever, some SSDs and HDDs all use SATA, and that's wired to the motherboard. If I can find it, there it is behind here. There it is, right there. So it goes into the motherboard. Now obviously that takes longer because it's got to go through a wire, and how it's powered is through this wire which goes to the GPU. Not the GPU, the power supply unit. Mixing up words. And okay, so there's newer and older HDDs. So newer all use like SATA and this type of power. When older uses Molex power, which if I take this out like this is a Molex power, 4 pins on the thing here, and right here, try to take this out. This is the newer power, which is also, I forget the name of it, but this is a newer power, so you can see it's all pins instead of those 4 holes, which there's pins on the actual GPU, but there's only 4 big pins. So yeah, and I think that's pretty much it. Just kind of some finer details. So say for the GPU, the PCIe slot, there's by 16. There's different PCIe slots. So by 16 is usually what the GPU uses because it does the most data, like transfers. And then there's by 8 and by 4. So say I think this is by 8 right here. Yes. So it's half. I don't know if you guys can see that. There's kind of like pins, and they stop right here, and then that's just empty. So that's probably by 8. Oh no, this is by 16. No, that's still by 8 because it may say by 16, but by 8. Yeah, so you can see it's less than say what the GPU would be, which is a full row of pins, but I don't really want to remove this right now. But it's basically, the pins go all the way. And then there's by 4, which I think is not that goes all the way across, but it basically stops right here. So a quarter of the power. This should be half of the power, and this is full power of the amount of data that it can kind of put out or use. Anyway, that's kind of basically it. If I missed anything or mixed, then let me know in the comments. And thank you to that guy that messaged and said the RAM is not an SSD and corrected me on that. And yeah, so have a good day, I guess.